Right, good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. This is my first time in the convention. As it was mentioned, I come from the University of Costa Rica, and I work specifically on the Research Center for Grains and Seeds, which we also deal with parts of knowledge as mycotoxins, which I was commenting that it's a topic that is not much common talked. But today, I want to put the light on the waste that the coffee industry is making, because as a country that we produce coffee, this is something that really impacts us. So now, as we're discussing, European Union, they accepted cascara as a novel food, so there's a way that we can put the waste that is produced, but we still have this in our countries. So we're also looking for other alternatives while we can export it. So what we're doing right now, and what I'm going to present, is a way to repurpose the fresh coffee husk into high-nutrition-value fruit spreads. So for starters, in Costa Rica, most of the coffee production is done through the wet processing. And we already, most of that produce and leftovers that they have, we already make it into compost. And coffee compost is a very common thing to find, for example, in garden centers. So it's already there. But the idea of having waste is also to be able to put it into human food, right? Or animal feed is the highest way we can repurpose the waste. And also, it is known in the case of the husk that there is high polyphenol compounds and anthocyanins that they could provide added value to the fruit spreads. So therefore, considering this, today I'm going to present one part, which is the fruit spread, and later on my colleagues, you will talk about another of ideas or how to use this into food. And then I'm going to start by explaining how we did the experimental setup on making these fruit spreads. So for starters, we have the plain coffee skin and pulp, which from now on will be SP. And then we did the fruit spread or the jam just with it. But then we also wanted to taste if it is needed to add pectin for consistency. So it was the coffee and the pectin, and then only the coffee with the guava. And why the idea of guava? Well, guava is a very non-common fruit for Costa Ricans, so we already know its flavor. And guava jam is a jam that we consume daily in Costa Rica. So besides from that, it also is high in pectin. So thinking about possibilities that agricultures may produce their own jams, so you will have two fruits instead of having to go buy pectin to the market. And also, it could be a gateway for consumers to have a particularly known flavor already. From these basic formulations, we said, since we're aiming for nutrition and healthier alternatives, so we do it in high sugar, which is 50-50 fruit and sugar, or we do it in low sugar, which is 3 parts fruit and 1 part sugar. And here is the first part, the color analysis, like what is the color we're gaining from it. And what we did here is measure different color parameters, and this is what is called a color projection, which is the parameters L for lightness, A from red to green, and B from yellow to blue. So as you can see on the jars on the left, which is the high sugar, they have a very dark color, obviously because of the high sugar content, right? And it resembles a little bit like to plum jam, I would say. And then on the right, you can see it's a little bit lighter. But among the treatments, either with guava that bring more red tone, is really not so perceptible, the difference to the human eye. So color-wise, yes, we have that the high sugar is darker. Now, for the nutritional part, we can see that the mineral matter content is expected if we do a formulation with more sugar, with more fruit, it will be higher. So on the right, we have the low sugar formulations. And here what is interesting is that we can see that that one that contains the guava, which is the orange one, has a lower mineral content. And this is because of the raw material. So the guava, you can see it is reported to contain between 0.3 and 0.8 percent of mineral matter. Whereas our coffee that we tested, the coffee husk, it has almost 8%. So we can already see that consuming the coffee pulp, it brings us more mineral content. And if you compare it to everyday consumed jams, for example, strawberries or apricots, it ranges very low between 0.12 to 0.25, we're already having a more nutritious fruit if we consume this. One of the main issues that we were experimenting with this was the moisture content. As you can see, for the high sugar is very low, which is what we expected, because sugar, we have only one part, but for the formulation with the low sugar, we needed also to add water to improve consistency. So already the water content is above 50, which could be an issue. And if you look to the right, which is the water activity, which for those who don't know, water activity is very important in fruit products because it's the first water that bacteria or fungi grow on, so it could be a potential issue for the shelf life. And here the water activity on the high sugar is below 0.8, which is considered safe. But on the right, for the low sugar, is almost 1, which is very high. So this is an indicator of that we need to make a more development into the low sugar to have it more a stable shelf life. And one part that is obviously most important is the caffeine content. So this is, I'm a little embarrassed to admit that to be in a coffee conference, I myself am not a coffee drinking person, because as it was, neither are you, yes, because as it was said yesterday, like I think my metabolism to process caffeine is very low. So I was yesterday drinking coffee and I could still feel it during the night. So as a non-coffee drinking person, having a marmalade or a jam made out of this is very important to put on the label, like what is the content, right? And obviously, if we add more sugar on the right for the low sugar formulations, you can see that it's high, it's above 2. And adding the guava reduces the caffeine content. But nevertheless, if we consider that as a consumption, normal consumption could be 1 tablespoon of marmalade or, jam, is around 20 grams. So if you consume only 1, then you're having around 60 milligrams of caffeine in just that consumption, which I think could be like nice for a person that is not able to process caffeine, but then you still have a little hint there. So nothing too extreme, like, yeah, like a coffee beverage, I'm sorry. And then coming why we label these fruit spreads and not jams, because of compliance. So for Codex Alimentarius, to be called a jam, it has to be between 60 and 65% or 65-degree Brix. So obviously our high sugar formulations, they are in this compliance, they're above 60, but the other ones in the low sugar, they are very low. So that's why we cannot call them jams, and that's why it's called fruit spreads. So this is just something to take into consideration for future labeling. And then from the sugar profile point of view, then, yeah, as expected, this is not much. We did analyze not all of the treatments, so we took out the one with pectin, and we left the contrast between coffee with high and guava and the low sugar, and this is because of consumer acceptance, because Costa Ricans tend to like very, very sweet, so that's why we took the high sugar. And obviously, in all treatments, you can see that the low sugar has that different concentrations in a lower projection, but between adding the guava, we see no technical differences between only coffee pulp or adding the guava. And then finally, we did a consumer acceptance, so a hedonic test, as was explained yesterday by Professor Timmerman. So we got to have 100 Costa Rican panelists from the university, non-trained panelists, and this is how we presented them the jams. And they were supposed to answer a few questions, and it was ranked from 9, they disliked it extremely, to 9, they liked extremely. And then the result that we have is, as you can see in the orange bar right there, it was the highest one, the one with coffee and guava. And this is very interesting because if we're trying to introduce a new product to the audience, then mixing with an already known product could be a good gateway to gain their acceptability. So to conclude, I want to say that the coffee jam and fruit spreads provide a nutritional alternatives, especially if we consider in the low sugar formulation. But the caffeine content is below the daily recommendation dose. And here is, I want to make a point very important in this point, because this is exactly for the varieties that we use of coffee, which in our case was Catuai and Caturra. So this has to be looked more into depth in each coffee-producing country, how is their fruit and their coffee content, and especially considering if we're also switching into other species, then this is something we have to consider. But yes, I showed the low sugar formulations required to be future developed to have a more stable shelf life. And finally, the guava is a promising fruit to be combined into these spreads to gain a gateway into the consumers. And I want to thank our team, which was in collaboration with the University of Hohenheim, and also the Fiat Pioneers Foundation that founded the master students that came to Costa Rica to do the studies, and of course all the collaborators that were involved. Thank you very much.